And we are live. It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast, to be exact. And I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And before we get into episode number 20, I want to talk to you, the people, about a few quick things. First off, you guessed it right. We are here in Detroit, Michigan for the Pistons versus Miami Heat 2-game series, I'm going to call it. We're going to have a lot of content coming from Detroit, so make sure to follow us on Instagram, subscribe, turn on your post notifications, because in the next couple days we will be having vlogs. So make sure to tune in and like and subscribe. And then also on Instagram, we have a lot of new content coming out as far as players warming up and content from Little Caesars Arena. Also, if you don't know yet, Grind Clothing Co. is our official merch sponsor. So make sure to click the link in our YouTube bio or in the description below, and that will shoot you right to Grind Clothing Co.'s website, where you can check out a plethora of different design options, and you can rep your favorite Detroit Pistons podcast, Revved Up 906. Also, make sure to find Grind Clothing Co. on Instagram, because they have a lot of other different designs that might just pique your interest. The creator and the designer there, he's top notch. So make sure to go check them out. Let's get into episode number 20. As you can tell from the thumbnail and the title, this week's topic is Leave Troy Weaver Alone. There's a lot going on in the press and with the fan, and a lot of fan talk. We see it in the Detroit community, so we want to talk about it. Ryan, first off, when talking about this topic of Leave Troy Weaver Alone, we can't ignore the statistics. Statistics tell a story. And to give the overall record of Troy Weaver being at the helm of general manager for the Pistons, his record is 70 wins, 229 losses. And then also earlier this season, as most know, they set or tied the record for most consecutive losses in a row. So with that being said, this story of Troy Weaver being with the Pistons hasn't been one with a whole lot of ups, right? It's been a lot of ups and downs, ups through the draft, downs through the season, so on and so forth. Now, Ryan, obviously everyone and a lot of people saw the clip of Troy Weaver's interaction with the fan at Little Caesars Arena. First off, Ryan, what are your thoughts? Is it necessary for fans to call out face-to-face Troy Weaver? Because obviously people are frustrated, but do you see that's the right way to go about it? What are some of your first thoughts on this altercation between Troy Weaver and this, what seems to be a Red Wings fan, but I guess it feels pretty hard about the Pistons?
Well, to me, it's kind of like, first off, kudos, because the fact that you had enough confidence to do that, I gotta give you props.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's still wrong, because you should never, in any role, shape, or whatever, you should not treat another human being in that manner.
Right.
It's not the right thing to do. Gotta just take the high road. You can say the comment, sure, but wouldn't it be better to just be like, yeah, I could make the comment, but you know what? I'm gonna hold off on it because it's not the time and place to do so. But I understand you're at a game. You can heckle people. It's a thing. You shouldn't, but it is a thing. So again, props to you for the fact that you had enough courage to do that. But at the end of the day, it is wrong. You should not, even if Troy Weaver deserves it or not. You could even reference the Tigers in this situation with Al Avila. What he did to the Detroit Tigers was terrible. And the fans let Detroit know, like, hey, we want him out. But that to me is a different situation, just because it was evident what Al Avila did to the Tigers, whereas Weaver, he really hasn't done necessarily anything wrong. He's tried a couple things and it just hasn't panned out yet. Most notably with Killian Hayes, Tyrese Halliburton, that situation.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing.
Outside of that, he really hasn't done too much wrong.
I agree. And the thing about this is we don't see the whole clip. If you guys have missed out, let's talk about the clip real quick and the quotes. This video starts with Troy Weaver saying, quote, "You're lucky I don't beat your butt," end quote. And then the fan says, "You suck at your job." And then Troy Weaver just kind of gives him a mean mug and is calling over security. And then the fan was eventually kicked out. So if you somehow missed that, that's what we're talking about here. And for me, I'm not a confrontational guy. I think it's all about the stats. And if you look at the stats, yes, it's a rough story. But when you look at the decisions that have been made, the biggest one that stands out is the Killian Halliburton. That's the only thing that I really think that stands out, because if you look at the rest of that draft, Saddiq Bey, we really liked Saddiq, and he was kind of a focal point of the offense at times, especially that first rookie year. And then Isaiah Stewart's really turned into this, he's kind of gives the team this oomph behind him, and just kind of embodies the toughness and grit that Detroit has. And I think the fans really just rally behind that, and that's a special thing. Not every fan base has that. So you look through the draft, and you're like, well, he hasn't made that many mistakes, because I agree with the Cade Cunningham over Jalen Green pick. Yep. There's those things where you look at okay, we could have had him. We could have had that guy through the draft, whatever. Most of the time, I'm happy with what Troy Weaver picked out. And in the end, it's difficult, but it hasn't fully connected yet. So with this altercation, the first question that comes to mind is, we know that Tom Gores doesn't really come to many home games at Little Caesars Arena anymore, just because of his rough tenure with the Pistons. With this altercation that happened just 4 days ago, do you think it alters the way Troy Weaver comes to games? Do you think he's going to continue to show up, or kind of stay low for a little bit?
I could see him staying low, but if you look back at what he said to the fan, I don't think he's going to stay low. I think he's still going to go to the games.
Right.
Still going to evaluate his team. And at the end of the day, who cares? In the broad scheme of things, yes, you just got heckled by a fan, but you still got to do your job.
Yeah.
If he hid and just stood aside and just didn't go to any other games, I think fans would be a little bit more upset with that. Mm-hmm. Is the fact that, you don't have the balls to take that heckle, and now you're going to just hide.
Right.
I would, in the community in general, I think we'd like to see him still out there evaluating, sitting there, just watching and taking everything in, rather than hide behind the scenes. Because if he hides, it's kind of like he's showing his cards, right? He's kind of being a coward in a sense.
Almost like a giving up kind of thing.
Yeah, and we don't want that. Nobody in the Detroit community, in Detroit sports history, wants to see that.
Right.
We never back down out of a fight. That's the thing. So to me, I do think he will be at games. It's just he may not go to every single one. But it really just depends on what does he have time to do on a given day, because we don't know necessarily what his duties truly are on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. Like, what does his schedule look like? Mm-hmm. Is he in and out of meetings? Is he meeting with Monty Williams every single day? Is he meeting with Tom Gores every single day? Is he just, what does his work schedule look like? We don't know. Right. So that's another thing into seeing if he's going to be at every game or not. But I want him to be at the games, because based off his comments alone, if he were to hide, that would be bad.
It would make things worse, it seems. Just because when there's no communication or there's no visual of Troy at those games, it's going to make fans go for him even more. Yeah. At least he's showing face. For me, during that altercation, I would have liked to seen Troy refrain from any comments like that. I just think the organization as a whole this kind of altercation was brewing, I think. It's been a rough season, rough couple seasons. Something like this was about to happen and bound to happen. And I just would have liked to have seen Troy kind of just ignore it, or just keep on pushing, because you hate to see what already is sort of a negative season. Then you add in these negative events, and it just kind of piles up. And that's when, organizations get really a bitter taste around the league.
I will say, though, one thing. Mm-hmm. It'd be one thing to do this to Tom Gores compared to Troy Weaver, just in the sense of,
I agree.
Tom Gores has really sat behind the scenes and has hidden away from the media coverage and has hidden away from fans and everything. So yes, Tom Gores, I am calling you out right now.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
But in a good way, just because like the fact that Troy Weaver has the guts to make those comments and potentially still comes to the games. He comes to pretty much every single game.
Yeah. Oh,
And
absolutely.
and Tom Gores, I understand you have platinum equity, big business there. You're a billionaire. I'm sure your work schedule is a lot more busy than Troy Weaver is. But the point is, like, you own the team, and yet you're not at almost any of the games. Why is that? And then the most recently, the Pistons' last trip out to LA to play the Clippers, you were there to chat up Steve Ballmer. Cool. But why aren't you in Detroit at Little Caesars Arena, the team that you own, watching them play?
Right.
That's my thing. So if anyone were to be called out, I think it's fair to say that Tom Gores should be called out because he's just sat back and watched this entire time.
Right.
I understand he went out in the process to really get Monty Williams in.
Yeah, I like that.
And he went out in the process to bring in Troy Weaver initially. But outside of those two moves, you really haven't had a true voice within the team. And I don't want you to play puppet master here. I don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
But I want you to at least be at the games and just taking in what your product has done because this season has been terrible.
Right.
And it's not necessarily all on Troy Weaver's shoulders here.
No.
It's Tom Gores too.
Mm-hmm. It's a trickle effect. If it starts at the owner and then it just goes all down through the organization. Speaking of Troy Weaver and Tom Gores, there's a quote that Troy Weaver has when talking about his conversations with Tom Gores and his confidence level of kind of turning around the team. And this is what Troy Weaver had to say on his conversations with Tom Gores. Quote, "He's given us everything we need to be successful," Troy Weaver said. "Tremendous support, leadership, and guidance through it all. He wanted to make sure that we stayed on it, and he stays on me every day on making sure we get this thing in the right direction, and we're excited about the challenge." That's a big thing to me. One, I think it kind of sounds like Troy is giving this simple answer that, yeah, Tom Gores does care. I would have liked to hear a little bit more details of what that is all about, but also that they're excited about the process of what it's going to take to turn this team around. And that sounds like a guy in Troy Weaver that hasn't given up yet, that isn't defeated yet. And Troy Weaver's a savvy guy. When we brought him in, we knew that he works well throughout the draft and is great at scouting and just knows guys that know how to play basketball and has great connections throughout the league. So for me, Troy Weaver hasn't given the intent of or the hints of possibly giving up, which is huge because you remember when Stan Van Gundy was on his last legs as GM with the Detroit Pistons, he made this crazy trade for Blake Griffin. Yep. Yes, it led to some fun wins in a playoff series, but it was a last-second just Hail Mary to try to save his job. And Troy Weaver, I don't think, has made those kinds of moves yet. He's really staying even keel. He made a lot of moves at the trade deadline, but it wasn't for some former All-Star, former MVP, that isn't quite there yet anymore. He went after these young guys, and he's buying into the young side of the NBA still. And to me, that proves a lot that he's buying into the process.
Yeah, and when you look back at what Troy Weaver was handed, and I always make the comment, he was not handed a Ferrari. He was not handed a Lambo. Mm-hmm. He was handed a team that honestly could have been considered a garbage truck. Like that team, Stan Van Gundy absolutely shredded. If you like the comment you made about Blake Griffin there, in that trade, we gave up Tobias Harris that at that time was relatively young still and playing great basketball, wanted to be in Detroit long term. Yep. You gave up Luke Kennard, which in that situation, I don't care because it's Luke Kennard. But then you also gave up a handful of draft picks that those in return, if you think about how bad the Pistons ended up being the next couple of years, man, those would have been nice to have still.
Well, and I believe that Clippers draft pick was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
Yeah, it was. And that's why it hurts more. So the point to be said is Troy Weaver was not given a top-tier roster right away. And his first move really was to bring in Dwayne Casey. And that was a great move.
Yep.
In terms of your first ever coach within your new established general manager role, Dwayne Casey as being your first head coach is pretty darn good because
Oh,
he
yeah.
came off Coach of the Year. The fact that Toronto even fired him was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But you get him, you start to establish a culture of what you want to be had. But at that time, you're going like, do we go full rebuild? Do we try and build something around Blake Griffin? What do we do here?
Right.
And they tried to see if it could work out as a playoff caliber team, and then it just didn't. And so they're going like, we're going to flip the switch. We're going to go full rebuild, and that's what happened. And so the point to be made here there too is you look at where we were with Stan Van Gundy the last couple of years or so,
Mm-hmm.
and you look at where we are now. Yes, our records are significantly worse than that point in time, but a lot of those guys on the team weren't going to be there long term. Those were the guys that you're going to bring in, try to see if something happens, and at the end of the day, if something happens, we can just move on from them. None of those players are here now for a reason because, like, even the Sekou Doumbouya pick, which I loved at the time, you loved at the time,
Yeah.
because we're going mini Giannis maybe,
You're right.
and then like even Henry Ellenson, we're going mini Dirk. Like, what is going on here? Those could be solid moves. And then you even look back at Stanley Johnson. We're going like this guy could be a stud, and none of those moves panned out. And then it wasn't until Troy Weaver comes in, and all of a sudden we're drafting far better than we have in recent years.
Right.
And even as bad as the Killian Hayes pick was, it wasn't even that bad.
Mm-hmm.
Because
We
you
got a good
compare
couple
him
years.
to Sekou, and you compare him to Henry Ellenson, at least he's stock.
Yeah.
So the point there is we weren't handed, or Troy Weaver rather, wasn't handed the cream of a crop team. And to see where we are now, yes, we have the worst record compared to those couple years, but I would argue we have the most talent we've had in a while.
Right. Yeah. One thing that I do like about having Troy Weaver at the GM position is we've looked kind of closely at pregame, like last year, and we're going to be looking closely at pregame and kind of like what's going on behind the scenes of what we see on TV. And what I liked what we saw when we were here in Detroit last year was Troy Weaver was on the court and around during pregame. A GM does not have to be on the court or add anything to warm-ups or anything 2 hours before the game. He's not adding anything to the experience, but he's there because he wants to keep an eye on how things are going. He wants to be involved. So I guess that's kind of the next topic I want to handle is, does Troy Weaver and Monty Williams' relationship add any benefits to this roster? Just because if they have a close relationship, that can kind of let them know who they have to get through the draft, who they have to get through free agency. How much do you think Monty Williams is involved with Troy Weaver's moves, and how close do you think they are?
I think they're close-knit. I think it's a tight relationship. And just because of the process alone, like Monty Williams with the Phoenix Suns brought in Campaign, which Campaign at the time was a free agent and really wasn't landing on any team anytime soon, especially after his time in Oklahoma City. And Monty was there with him in Oklahoma City as an assistant and wanted to bring him in because he knew he could get something out of him. And Campaign, I'm not saying they're exact, but Campaign honestly kind of reminds me of Marcus Sasser a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Just very similar in a couple of their personalities and play style goes. And like that last pick, the fact that we traded back into the first round to take Marcus Sasser, that was a pick where it's like, oh, what is this?
Right.
And then even like Troy Weaver wanted to get rid of Killian Hayes to start the season in the offseason. And Monty's like, no, I want to see what I can do with Killian because I really think I could turn him around. And so I think there is a close, tight-knit relationship there. And a first draft for any new coach, GM combination,
Right.
It's going to be potentially a little rough.
Yeah.
But usually the second draft is where you nail the head on the coffin, and it's usually pretty spot on. And that's why I'm excited to see where this goes because, yes, Asar Thompson has shown flashes of like, whoa, but he's also been like, ooh, why are you doing that? I don't know if that's necessarily the right play, Asar.
Right.
And then even Marcus Sasser lately, the last couple games or so, last 20 games or so, he's been a little bit on the colder side compared to what he had earlier this season. And so it's what happens in a rookie year. So I think they do have a close, tight-knit relationship, and I think they really are truly breaking down each player on a daily basis. What can we get out of him? Do we see him in the future? And these new guys coming into the draft, where can we pinpoint certain players to really bring this team forward?
Yeah, I agree. And what's cool is I watched basically a vlog on the Detroit Pistons YouTube channel where it was draft day, and it was one of Monty Williams' first day on the job. And in the draft room is Troy Weaver, all the guys, right? Troy Weaver, Monty Williams. And we get a SAR, everyone's just celebrating, and they're like, okay, what do we do with this 25th pick? You know, and they're kind of evaluating. And Monty Williams speaks up and he says, I like this Marcus Sasser. I think there's something there. And Troy Weaver took him at his word. And it shows a trust there, a trust in not just knowledge, but of forming a cohesive team.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to remember, too, Troy Weaver and Dwayne Casey kind of curated this last team.
Yeah.
Well, now this season, Monty Williams is in, and we know that he likes to vouch for guys,
Mm-hmm.
you know, seeing Cameron Payne, like you said, and stuff like that. So it's going to take time, but I think with Monty Williams and Troy Weaver working closely, I think they're going to curate this upcoming draft to a little bit more of what Monty wants, and Monty can kind of vouch for certain players, and I think that's going to be big because one guy can't make the best decisions all by himself. It takes a team. It takes a duo. And I think Monty Williams is going to be a big part of that. Now that we're kind of talking about the draft, and Troy Weaver's probably starting to think that way a little bit, and free agency, you know, once the finals ends, and then there's a couple weeks, and then free agency will be back open, and a lot of big names open and talking about different teams this upcoming offseason. What's the next move that's going to be a game changer for the Pistons that Troy Weaver is going to make? Is it going to be through free agency? Because there's a lot of talk of having some good cap space. And then also with the Pistons losing and struggling, being at the bottom of the East, they're going to get a solid draft pick. And we all kind of know that this year's draft is on the weaker side than past years. So, Ryan, what do you think is the next game changer move?
Well, first off, you really got to evaluate the roster at the end of the season. You look at what moves Troy Weaver made at the deadline, and honestly, there were a lot of positives. Everybody was going like, oh, Bojan and Alec Burks for all these guys, what the heck? Or even Monte Morris, just for a couple of them. It's just a lot of questions were in the air because you moved on from 3 good veteran players, and what did you get in return? And I think the biggest move that Weaver made at the deadline that really, really helped us spring us forward a little bit more is the move for Simone Fontecchio.
Oh, that was great.
Because like the fact that you turned Kevin Knox into Simone Fontecchio. Like, first off, Kevin Knox had flashes from time to time. I thank you for that because you really helped us get some wins here and there. Not that we've had many, but you've helped. But Simone just isn't. He's a stud.
Yeah.
And it's a good find because Simone is coming into the Pistons in a situation where he's like a young Bojan Bogdanovic. He's coming in at a time where he obviously hasn't spent a lot of time in the league, in the NBA, because he's played overseas. He's had that experience. And overseas players in the league the last couple of years have had a ton of success just because the game in Europe is much harder than it is in the NBA, just from their perspectives alone. Mm-hmm. It's much different and more aggressive. You're not getting flopping calls or weak fouls that you're getting today. So Simone just he does a little bit more than Bojan. He can shoot, of course,
right,
but he can slash. He's fast. He's quick. He has good reflexes, high basketball IQ, can pass. He fills the lanes on defense pretty darn good compared to Bojan, but he was a good find. I think Quentin Grimes going forward is a good find. He's one of those good, solid role players that you're going to want coming off the bench. But outside of those two, I mean, Troy Brown, we really haven't seen him. And Evan Fournier has his moments, but going forward, I think bringing in Troy Brown Jr. and Evan Fournier and a couple of those other guys are kind of like moves as in let's see what we can get for draft capital in this upcoming draft. And if we can move them and get picks back, that opens up more cap space to potentially land a big free agent.
Yeah.
So I think for sure locks after the trade deadline are Simone Fontecchio and Quentin Grimes. With that being said, I think the rest of the roster, nothing really changes because James Wiseman, my goodness, the last couple of games or so has stepped up.
Rock solid.
And I honestly think the addition of bringing Taj Gibson in on the 10-day contract there to really mentor James Wiseman and the rest of the bigs has helped a lot.
Yeah.
And just look at James Wiseman alone. He made the comment, bringing him in, I feel a lot more confident in my abilities, something that I haven't felt since college. And that's saying a lot because in college, he really didn't even play. So I really think the way Troy Weaver is going to go is I think he's going to try and open up as much cap space as he can for free agency and try to make a couple somewhat small, big splashes with a couple of those free agents because, like you said, the draft class this year is weaker. And just hope that you can get a couple younger players that have the experience but have the knowledge and have success at this level while also not spending too much and saving cap space. And then you look at the draft and see like Matas Pazulis as an example. I would love to have him play on the Pistons next year.
Right.
He's one of my favorites for this upcoming draft because he's a stretch four. We don't have a stretch four.
Right.
The closest thing to the stretch four is Simone Fontecchio.
Yep.
But with that being said, I really think Weaver's going to try and land a couple of like the good/great free agents this upcoming offseason, and then he's going to take a safe but good pick in the draft, and he's just going to go on from there. And if there happens to be a sneaky good player that we haven't covered yet or evaluated, and Troy Weaver and Monty Williams would be the guys to do it because of Marcus Sasser alone, as an example.
Yeah, and I'm about to look up some of these this season's some of the free agents that we have coming up. I mean, there's some huge names, but a guy, I've heard talks of Tobias Harris. I know that's somebody I've heard a lot about. There's Pascal Siakam, Gordon Hayward, DeMar DeRozan, Bruce Brown, some of the bigger names, Klay Thompson, Paul George, LeBron. I don't know if I said James Harden, but there's some big names in this year's free agency, and I think that it's a big possibility they go after one of those big names just because of the draft the way it is. I agree. I do like Matas, but it's going to be interesting to kind of see what's going to happen because it just seems like something's brewing. I don't know why. I just, like, after following the team and just kind of watching closely, it seems like we haven't had a big pickup in free agency in how many years, So it's like, I think we have something brewing. You mentioned Quentin Grimes earlier and the addition of him. I just kind of wanted to give the quote that Troy Weaver gave when talking about his vision for Quentin Grimes meshing with the Detroit Pistons group because it really seems like in this quote that Troy Weaver really has like a affinity for Quentin Grimes and kind of wants to try to get Quentin Grimes out of his shell and kind of take that next step. Quote, Grimes is a 3-and-D guy. Kelvin Sampson, Houston coach, and I spoke with him about Marcus Sasser, and he said his two hardest workers were Sasser and Quentin Grimes. We're excited about adding Grimes. He fits the profile we need. He doesn't need the ball, makes shots, and defends at a high level. Great teammate. I mean, we expect him to step into a role to help support the young core. He's young, so he'll be a part of that group, and for him to continue to grow as well. So excited to add him to the group. He was a huge target for us. So we haven't seen much from Quentin Grimes yet, but we know that Troy Weaver is going to make an emphasis on, Monty Williams rather, is going to make an emphasis on getting Grimes minutes just because we know Troy Weaver's kind of picking and prodding about those kinds of things. So it's kind of exciting, and it's going to be interesting. It's going to be another wild free agency. If we know how Troy Weaver is, it's going to be another wild ride. It always is. It's never failed. Last year towards the end of the season, this is more of just like a prediction thing. We saw Troy Weaver send out the sorry letter basically to the fans of Detroit Do you think he should send 1, 2, or 3 sorry letters to the fans?
Well, I think 3 is overdoing it because we got one last year.
Yeah.
But if anything, I expect 1. I
Yeah.
don't expect many.
Right.
And even if it is 1, it's probably not going to be as long as it was this past year. It's probably going to be short to the point. Like, yeah, we had one of the worst seasons ever, and I do
Yeah.
apologize for that. And I do apologize to the one fan that I really called out after he called me out.
I hope he includes him. I hope he
hope so
includes. That
too.
would be awesome. Hey, and shout out to that fan I had an altercation with.
You really motivated me to write out this letter to all you guys.
You strive to make me better.
Yeah. But I think if he does do anything, it's probably 1. But I wouldn't. To me, it's cool that he did that last year. You don't need to do it again. We all know that this year was worse than last year.
Right.
So with that being said, if you did it again, it's kind of like, so
Beating
is
a
he
dead-
expecting to lose? Or
Right.
like that's how I would view it.
No, yeah, I'm right in the same book as you. It's like it'd be even more. It'd kind of make it more frustrating to me, just because it's like, what is this going to be a yearly thing?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Is this now like like something we have to do every year? But I do like that he did it last year, but it's just more like this year's worse than last year. It's like maybe we get 2 this year. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see. But it's just kind of interesting. Make sure to comment below your thoughts on the Troy Weaver situation. A lot going on with the organization, and always a little bit of drama undertone with the Detroit Pistons. Ryan, any last comments before we wrap up episode number 20?
I said it in the beginning, and I'm gonna stand by it because I like standing by what I say.
Yeah.
And I truly do believe that Troy Weaver, in his own sense, I'm going to say in his own sense because that could be interpreted in different ways, in his own sense, could be the right fit for the Pistons. And when we talked about him coming in originally, after Stan Van Gundy there, we're going like, oh my goodness, we just jackpot.
Right.
We hit the jackpot because we got a guy that has had a lot of success within front offices before, Oklahoma City, the whole 9 yards, drafting Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook and being part of that and that team. He really knows how to get the most out of a draft because when you get to work with guys like Sam Presti, who's honestly has to be one of the better GMs ever, just because of the draft capital he has alone and where the Oklahoma City Thunder are with their young core. It's been impressive to see what that organization has been able to create, and it's all at the hands of Sam Presti. And Troy Weaver was a part of that. And I really do believe that Troy has a lot of those same philosophies and motivations that Sam Presti had, and it's just been influenced and handed down to him. So I really do trust Troy Weaver. And I'll admit, this past year with the draft, when we took Asar, I got down on my knees because I was like, what the heck did we just do? But I've been proven wrong because at times Asar Thompson has lit it up. He's looked amazing. And his three-point shot has come along.
It's gotten better, yeah.
It really has. We used to say like, oh no, Asar, why are you taking that shot? And now it's like, oh,
Take it.
Okay, I don't mind that.
Right.
But the point is, I think we still need to stick behind Troy Weaver's side because he has not done anything wrong by the Pistons. He just hasn't done a whole lot of things right. In regard to top-tier talent coming in through the draft, guys in free agency, making trades. He's played it a little too safe so far. I think he needs to make a couple bold moves, but be smart about your bold moves. Don't go out and get a Blake Griffin. We don't want that. We don't want to trade away our entire future to get a guy that sucks. And Blake Griffin, I don't like you. I'm sorry, but I don't like you. You made us suck. And but that was mainly Stan Van Gundy's fault.
Right.
But again, the point is we got to stick behind Troy Weaver.
I have to say I did drink the Blake Griffin Kool-Aid. I had a Blake Griffin jersey. I can't even lie, people. Can't even lie. I was young and dumb. Young and dumb. My last 2 comments before we wrap up episode number 20 is leave Troy Weaver alone. Leave him alone. Leave him alone. And in Troy Weaver we trust. That will do it for episode number 20 of season 2. We talked about just leave Troy Weaver alone. Before you guys leave, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any comments about the Troy Weaver situation and the state of the Detroit Pistons, make sure to comment below. We will see you guys in the next Revved Up episode. Peace.